Well, welcome, Dominic. Thanks for being here.
It's great to be here, Sean. Nice to see you.
You too. Nice to meet you at last. Well, you've had a long, distinguished career in software, but you started off in the army, didn't you?
I did actually, yes. When I left school, I went straight into the army. I didn't go to university actually. In those days, you sort of didn't do both mostly
Mm.
in a career. So I went to the Guards Depot at Purbright for 2 months and had an absolute beating. Absolutely not allowed out. Oh my God, it was extraordinary. Don't know how we survived it. Really, there were about 18 of us on the course. I mean, some didn't. And then, of course, you go to Sandhurst, and I did a 3-year commission, a short, what they call short service commission, into the Irish Guards, which actually was my father's regiment during the war. He was in the Irish Guards and liberated
Mm.
Luxembourg and things like that. So he was very keen for me to follow him into the regiment. And, it was great fun. I was in the jungles of Belize, making sure the Guatemalans weren't invading because they were threatening to. Training junior guardsmen at the Guards Depot, and of course public duties. But marching around Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, had dinner with the Queen a few times. All that la-di-da stuff. So great fun actually for a young person, and I saw a lot. It is quite an extraordinary thing, really, as you get the army. Where the last night we were in Belize, we were in a mud hut with Mayan Indians. Actually, they tended to
Mm.
clothes, and they were cooking a little suckling pig in this sort of mud sort of bowl, and we were swapping compo rations.
Mm.
The next day, we went headed back to the airport camp, got on a Hercules, went back to Brize Norton, and the next day I was in my guard's uniform, tunic, bearskin, sort of marching up to Windsor Castle. And when I got there, the phone rang at the officer's mess and said, "This is Sir Robert Guy, Equus the Queen. Her Majesty would very much like you to have dinner with her tonight."
Oh,
And I
wow.
thought, Mikey. So one night I'm literally in the middle of a jungle with no electricity, no water, no running, with nothing, right? And people, and then the next minute up at the Castle of the Queen. So it was an extraordinary, broad experience, actually.
Mm.
Extremely lucky to have it. Having said that, I was never going to be a permanent member of the armed forces. I had always yearned to be a businessman, and so that was my first love was advertising.
Right. How did you start off in advertising and marketing then, and what happened there?
So it was about 1981, 82. It was quite a difficult time. It had been quite a big recession, and people weren't hiring. So I had to write a lot of letters. And those days, you didn't have the internet. I make phone calls, and I was lucky. There was a small agency that just needed a junior tick to come and help. And so I got in as a young junior account executive at a place called Clark Buber Hill, which was part of a bigger organization. And I did a couple of years there working on Volvo cars, Sichel wine, Blue Nun. God, does
All
anybody
right.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
You've
Yeah.
probably had a couple of glasses of Blue Nun in the past. I don't think I haven't seen it on the shelves actually recently, so I bet it's no longer there. But anyway, with these sort of big accounts and Carlsberg was another account. And so, we would come up with advertising campaigns and sales promotions and so on.
Mm.
And I loved it. I mean, marketing is my first real passion because it's, when you think that a car salesman, walk into Volvo's showroom and the car salesman takes over, you can point the car, The question is, how do you get that customer into the showroom, right? Because
Mm.
you're not actually selling. What you're doing is you're pre-selling essentially when you advertise. So you have to conjure up some image which appeals to your audience and make them think, gosh, I'm interested now. I will go and see a show. And then the salesman will take over. But you can't be that salesman. You have to be, looking at all the ways to try and persuade somebody to buy it. So we use all the usual tricks, marketing tricks to do that. And I found it great fun. But it all changed when, after 2 years, and I was now 25 years old, my brother came home with a Commodore 64.
Right.
And he was playing a game called Heroes of Khan. And it was an adventure game. And I'd never seen an adventure game. I'd seen Space Invaders and all that, and I loved all those things. But this was completely different. And I thought, gosh, this is going to be huge. So I I went back to the agency, and my first thought was we must get one of these companies, Sinclair or Commodore, as a client, right?
Mm.
But as I walked up the stairs and I went into Terry Boubert's office, who's one of the managing directors, and I was about to give him this great idea, I stopped, and a thought hit me, and I thought, gosh, no, wait a minute. Maybe you should start a company making these games for this new market, which is happening.
Mm.
So he looked up at me. I can see him. He looked up, and I just and I looked at him, and I went, "Oh, Terry, wait a minute. Look, I'll get back to you." And I walked out, went downstairs, and I just thought, "Gosh, there's something here." So I I grabbed the nearest person, a guy called Mark Strachan, and we were good friends in the agency. And I said, "Come on, let's have a pint of beer." So we went out to Clerkenwell Green. There's rather an attractive pub on the corner. We went in, and I told him my idea that we start a company, make these games, and I showed him.
Mm.
And I said, "Are you in?" And he said, "Yes, of course." We were in business, and 7 weeks later, we left and started trying to raise money.
Hmm. Your first game was Eureka. So what was the inspiration for that game?
So, it was a combination of things. I mean, the one thing was, of course, what I was going to try to make was an adventure game rather than a Space Invaders or Breakout or any of those kind of arcade games. I was looking at this new wave of entertainment, and so adventure game was the first thing. Secondly, there had been this book that had come out called Golden Hair, a fellow called Kit Williams. And it was a sort of poem on the left of the page, and on the right, a very detailed, but beautiful illustration. And the clues were between the words and the illustration. And the idea was there was a field somewhere, in UK, where he had buried this golden hair, solid gold hair. Because I have a feeling that he was also a sort of a goldsmith or jeweler or something, and he
Yeah, yeah.
made this thing. And if you worked it all out, you find the coordinates, sort of, ordnance coordinates to be able to find where the thing was buried. And so it was a competition, effectively.
Oh, that was Masquerade, wasn't it? The book.
Sorry, exactly right. You got it. It was
Yeah,
called
yeah.
Masquerade, absolutely right. Yeah, and I sort of lent on that idea and combined it with an adventure game. So the idea was that you play this game, and if you got through to the very end, you reveal a telephone number,
Hmm.
and if you rang the telephone number, and then you would win £25,000. So on the front of the box, it said, win £25,000. And that was the idea. That again, you can see how the sort of the sales promotion part of my brain was working. Which was trying to get
Yeah.
people to buy this game, not necessarily because it was an enormously good game, but because there was a prize element to it, a prize draw. So that was the idea. And we got a lawyer called Robert Bond to put an answer machine and a dedicated telephone line to his bedroom. And every day he would look to see if anybody had rung the answer machine, because if anybody did find the number day or night, that would be a hello, have you found that? Leave your name and number, we'll get back to you. And it took, oh gosh, I think nearly a year before that was activated.
It must have been I mean, that was a good way to organize the telephone security, but obviously games can get hacked as well. So I take it the phone number was sort of encrypted in there somewhere.
It was, and I don't think I was ever. I think we were quite careful to not. We didn't know the number, nor. I think the programmers sort of buried it somewhere, and I have no idea quite what they
Hmm.
did. But Matthew Woodley, who was about 15 years old at the time, had been digging and digging, playing this game for ages and ages and ages, and finally somehow got through to the final, passageway or whatever it was, and found the number, buried deep at the end of the game, and he rang the lawyer, and sure enough, won the prize. But I'm not sure that it was very sophisticated in terms of encryption or anything like that. I had no idea whether it could have been hacked, by somebody, but but somehow or other it wasn't. In those days, I think things were little bit simpler than they are now.
Yeah, there were. It was programmed by Ian Livingston, wasn't it? So how did you get him involved?
Right. So actually, well, I was introduced to Ian
Hmm.
and by a PR guy, actually, a guy called David Bishop, and uh, we went to see him at the Games Workshop, which of course he
Hmm.
had started with Steve Jackson, and it was I'm going to say it was in Park Royal or somewhere like that in some southwest London, and we went to see him, and I remember seeing a very bright red Porsche sitting outside this rather sort of well, utilitarian building, really, sort of rather brick
Hmm.
ex factory or something. And we went in, and there was Ian, who in those days had a lot of hair,
Right.
and
Uh,
and it was really going well. Games Workshop, they were making lots of money, and he'd formed it with Steve when they were students, I think, at Manchester University. And anyway, he was very much a games guru, you know. So
yeah.
he'd written these fighting fantasy books. So we sort of thought that he'd be the ideal, again, bit of marketing, Ian Livingston, who by then was getting quite famous with these little fighting fantasy books, has written the story of Eureka, the fantasy story, and it was a good tie-up. So we were at the same time trying to raise money for the company, and Ian was one of the first people to get his checkbook out. So you can imagine the two of us go into his office and we're sitting and he's behind his desk. And then we say, we want you to write the stories and blah, blah, blah. And, we'll agree a royalty, et cetera, et cetera. And then, oh, we're raising money. And he says, oh, how much are you looking for? So we said, oh, £160,000. So he got his, checkbook out of his drawer and wrote a check for £10,000 and
Oh,
handed it,
wow.
which would be like 100 grand today, as it were. So, he really did sort of get us going in a way. And of course, after that, more and more people put money in, and we did get our target fundraise. And then, of course, we were able to go and get it going.
Yeah. I mean, that put you on the road. How difficult was it? Because I remember games companies back then, a lot of it was mail order, wasn't it? So did you start mail order?
It really was a mail order business at the point of conceiving this whole idea and the company.
Mm.
By the time we got close to launch, it had gone into retail.
Ah, I see.
Boots were carrying computer games, all on little cassette tapes in a little
Mm.
box.
Yeah.
WH Smith was a big retailer. There, all sorts of mom and pop stores had started up all over the country with people selling, of course, Spectrums and Commodores and joysticks,
Yeah.
but also ranges of games, which were these cassettes. This is well before the console market, so it was and before floppy disks even. It was just purely, uh,
Mm.
and that changed things. So we were focused on a marketing campaign, which is mail order driven, to get people to fill in a coupon and write in their whatever their credit card number and send it in. But honestly, it changed so quickly, and
Mm.
we found ourselves pivoting to head towards the buyers at these big retailers and indeed distributors,
Mm.
because there was a big distributor called Micro Dealer who took care of all the small shops, because they needed a supplier of all the different, and they would buy in bulk, big quantities. So we had to go charging around. And of course, it was very difficult because we only had one phone line in our office. Those are the days when it was run by the GPO, General Post,
Mm.
not British Telecom, which hadn't happened. And so, if you wanted to, this is when the government, ruled and owned the thing. And if you wanted a second line, you waited 6 months.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's what the state is like. If you allow the state to operate these things, there's no profit motive, so they don't care. And I mean, now if you want a line, you get it in 5 seconds flat. But so we had to wait 6 months for a second telephone, right? In
Right.
our office, private shop in Fulham. And so when you made a phone call and the person was out, or you had to you couldn't pick up the phone and make another call because you were expecting him to call you back. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it was agonizing, absolutely agonizing to try to get appointments and make the, oh my God. Anyway, we did, and sure enough, we did sell thousands of these games, and that was it worked.
It was probably the best time to start a games company, though, wasn't it? Because there was a lot of people just going into this new industry, and I don't think many people knew what was going on. They were just sort of winging it. So,
This was the big advantage. I mean,
mm.
none of us knew anything, which was great because we knew nothing, but we had no disadvantage. There were a few quite good businessmen who had gone into it, like David Ward, for
Mm.
example, Ocean, Jeff Brown at US Gold Stroke Centresoft. So there were quite a lot of senior, well, see, look, they were in their mid 30s, to us, they were old men, But generally speaking, it was a wild west of young people trying,
Yeah.
trying to get it going. And I seem to recall that CTW, which was the trade magazine at that time, now it's MCV and all that, but in those days, CTW, which is just purely for the games market, really, trade. Um, they did a survey. They found something like 600 registered software publishers in the UK. I mean,
Wow.
it was extraordinary. All fighting for attention, all fighting for shelf space, and so on and so forth. But I think because we were really focused on marketing, and every time we put a game out, we really surrounded it by advertising in all the fan magazines and later on the computer game magazines. That the buyers sort of would look and see, it was the advertising of, I don't know what it was, James Bond, Star Wars, whatever it was that we were doing in these magazines, and presume that we would drive traffic to their stores and therefore put in a big order and select us for their shelves. Whereas if you weren't doing any of that activity, they wouldn't list you. So
Yeah. Yeah.
our advertising background was actually our advantage. We weren't both either of us programmers or games designers. We were just business guys with a marketing edge.
Mm. Obviously, you're the Dom part of Domark.
Yeah.
So where did Mark come into it?
Well, as I said, Mark, obviously was the guy at the advertising agency who was my age, and we were friends.
Mm.
Who I hoiked out and said, "Come on, let's do this." And he was quite an entrepreneurial fellow, still is actually, and he jumped at the chance. We were 50-50. Um, and we were sort of Tweedledum and Tweedledum. I mean, we had partners' desk. We were opposite each other all day long. We would go to see buyers together. We did distribution later on across the world. We went around the world on one 3-week occasion. But we just hung out together, and we had such a lot of fun. I mean,
Mm.
we were laughing and laughing and laughing all the time, making jokes, and it was quite infectious. And so, but it probably would have been better if one of us had been like, a finance guy, and the other had been like a marketing business guy. Because
Mm.
I think what we didn't know then, which I do now,
Mm.
is the finance side, how to raise money, how to acquire other businesses, how to build a business, uh,
Yeah.
just in trading, but also funding and so on. And we had no clue about that, and we didn't know anybody who had any clue about that. So we had a finance director, but he was young and he didn't know anything either. So that was our Achilles heel, I think, was that we I think we could have look at the end of the day, we were the last surviving pretty much UK, not probably there's Team 17 and a few others, but really today, if you think about it, Eidos as a which because Dominic obviously became Eidos, we renamed it. But that company, our company, was the last standing out of all those 600 or whatever.
Mm.
And we went public and we did very, very well. And I think, however, on mature reflection, that if we'd had somebody in our team who had been a real financier, we
Yeah.
we could have just gone to the moon because we had all the other bits. We just didn't have that piece. But Mark,
Well, I mean, you were very successful. I mean, you were one of the first ones to adopt licensing, wasn't you? Like films and big films and stuff like that. And going back to your James Bond license, Living Daylight. So, How did you get into all that side of things?
So my grandfather was an author called Dennis Wheatley,
Oh,
who
yes, that's well known.
some of the older viewers may recall. I mean, but maybe actually, I own all the rights to his books, and they are still published in ebooks, you know,
Hmm.
and so they still sell. But he was a very famous author at that time, and he was his agent also represented Ian Fleming. So so one lunch when we were just sort of chatting, he said, "Yeah, obviously, what are you up to?" And I said, "This, that, and the other." And he said, "Oh, you should make a computer game based on James Bond." And I said, "That's a brilliant idea, John." John Parkinson was the fellow. And he said, "Well, okay, well, look, we did a deal, you know, on the back of an envelope." And so we got the rights to the next James Bond movie, which happened to be The Living Daylights, which I think
Hmm.
was Roger Moore's last Bond movie, I think. And so anyway, we got found a team of programmers. I can't for the life of me remember who they were, but anyway, they made a rather sort of pedestrian game, to be honest with you. But we had a big launch. We took over Pinewood Studios and had an enormous cinema there, and we had 200 journalists and the great and the good and buyers from W. Smith, and you know,
Hmm.
a huge party down there, a premiere to see the movie before it went into the cinemas. So that was a great draw, you know. And and it you know and it sold very well. I mean, as I say, I don't think it was a very good game to be frank. But again, it sort of led us into the idea of licensing. So that led to others. So, for example, well, the next one I think we did might have been Trivial Pursuit, and
Yeah, yeah.
and again, there was a company called Leisure Genius which had done Scrabble and Monopoly and you know Pictionary, like a couple of the other games, but they hadn't done Trivial Pursuit, and I think it's because they couldn't quite figure out how to do it.
Hmm.
But we came up with a way that we thought it would work. And we employed a team of Oxford like, undergraduates. I think it was called Oxford Digital, run by David Pringle, who was himself a nuclear physicist, no less,
Oh,
and a lovely guy. And we every week we go down in the evenings with a crate of beer, and we'd sit with this 4 or 5 person team, and they were all doing it after hours, you know. And we'd go through the thing, and you know what? They produced a very compelling, good, fun game. I mean, it was really good fun. I mean, it would play music and say, what's the name of this tune? Or it would have a picture of Italy, you know,
hmm.
and say, what's this country? You know, and you typed in. So it was really good. And it had the wheel and all those categories and wedges and all the rest of it. So as a game, actually, it was actually pretty decent. Um, but by then we were slightly in trouble because we'd taken out an overdraft facility with Lloyd's Bank. And while we were waiting for this game to be finished to sell, we'd sort of run up a debt of about £250,000.
Right.
And yeah, and it's quite a lot. And poor, there's a fellow called Mr. Money. I mean, great name for a bank manager, Mr. Neil Money, and he was a fantastic guy, but he started to get a bit nervous, you know, as time wore on, and you know we'd have to go and see him and sort of calm him down, you know. You could see his life flashing in front of him, you know. And of course, it was completely unsecured. I mean, it wasn't, we didn't have any houses to give him or anything like that. So I think he realized he made a massive mistake at some point. And so very important that we finished it and we got it done and out there. And I think actually at that time, towards the end, we stopped paying ourselves, you know. And I think
Hmm.
I think my mother had to sort of, you know, contribute to my mortgage and food bills. So it was a pretty dicey time.
Yeah.
But but uh, one of the first big things that happened was we were able to get a sell deal to the book club associates. Now I know it sounds odd, but in those days, the book club associates, what they were, they would do. It was a you joined the club and you got sort of half price books, and about every 6 7 weeks they would send you their main selection, which would be the default book of that bit. And so you received it, whether you'd asked it for it or not. It's all part of your subscription. And it was a brilliant marketing wheeze, and they did very, very well. And they opened up a computer game
Mm.
of that. So they had a little pamphlet that be mailed out, and people could choose games at half price. And so they would buy in bulk at very good prices from publishers, and then pass on the savings. And there was a girl called Anne Dixon who is in charge of it. She was a fantastic marketing woman, really fantastic person. And we got very close to her, obviously, because she was a big buyer. And we took her out to the Gavroche, which is a very smart restaurant, and poured lots of wine. She did like a glass of wine, so we were on that. And sure enough, she put in an order for 250,000 of these cassettes across the Commodore spectrum. And I don't think it was Amstrad at that time, but those two, because they were big clubs.
Mm.
And I think I'm going to say it was sort of £3 a thing, and it cost us about 50p to make the thing, about 50p. So we a couple of quid. So that was a big profitable moment suddenly. And we got the check, and we went to see the bank manager. We asked for an appointment, and he was obviously feeling nervous and wondering what we wanted. And we made sure it was midday. And we went in and we sort of pretended to look rather glum.
Mm.
And then he was, you could see the blood sort of draining out of his face and what we were going to say. And then we put the check sort of, for 750,000 or whatever it was on his desk. And he literally kind of literally almost fainted with relief, I mean, and the colour came back to us. And sure enough, a great celebration. We said, well, we booked a table, around the corner at a smart restaurant. Come, Neil, we'll go out for lunch. So we went out and had a big, massive lunch, and he was obviously thrilled. And that was put us back into business, and it really did get us going. And of course, we sold more trips. I think we sold more than 1 million copies of that game.
Yeah.
And it really put a lot of money in our bank. And then we were off. We were off to big new offices in Putney, and we hired people. And
I thought it was a clever way of doing the game because I'm from a game background. I was an artist, but I've designed games, and I thought the trouble with quiz games is obviously you've got the right answer in your database, but how do you know what the players decided? And there's only two ways you can really do it. One's like a multiple choice, which means you've got 3 times more data, in memory and that sort of thing. But it was really clever the way you did it. It was just a case of, did you get it right? Told you the answer, said, did you get it right?
yeah,
And it's such an elegant way of doing it, isn't it? It's like yes or no. It's peer pressure, isn't it, to say the right answer?
it's kind of how you do it generally. And I think that's right. They did a really, really good version of it, and people genuinely enjoyed playing it. I mean, obviously, the license, Trivial Pursuit in those days was hugely popular. It was the biggest board game seller ever. And there were 3 boys. Horn Abbott was the name of their company. I think there was either 2 horns and 1 Abbott, or 2 Abbotts and 1 horn. But anyway, there was brothers, and then there was a friend.
Mm.
They'd been beach bums, actually. They played board games all the time, and they came up with their own idea for board game, and the rest was history.
Yeah. Well, you did a lot of games with Atari. So how did all that start?
Oh, that was really funny because I went to Las Vegas for CES, and it was a big show, which nowadays people go to, Gamescom and that sort of thing. But those days it was in America, Vegas in January, and Chicago in June, and there were big sections of that big show with video games. And I went on my own because we couldn't actually afford this. But I think it must have been just as we were doing Trivial Pursuit before we launched Trivial Pursuit. I mean, I was on my own because we couldn't afford both of us to go. And I didn't know anybody, but I had heard or been contacted by a fellow called Manlio Allegra, who was an agent for all the big arcade companies, Capcom, Namco, Taito,
Mm.
Atari. And he was issuing licenses on their big popular arcade machines to home computer publishers like Ocean, US Gold, Elite, Steve Wilcox at Elite. And so they had started to license these big games. And I met with him, and he said, Dominic, You got to get in the game. You got to be here. You're done. You're finished. You're out. You're gone. You got to license these games. And I'm like, okay, but what does it cost? And he's like, well, like for a AAA game, it's $250,000 up front, and for a double A game, it's 100. And I'm like, remember the menu? Stop. Can't. There's no way. Can't do that. Dominic, don't you got to be serious. Anyway, he had a whole list of games and it printed out. And I said, can I have a look at your list?
Mm.
I said, sure. And I looked at it and I went down quite a long list. And then I suddenly saw Star Wars. And I remember playing the arcade
Mm.
Star Wars on Wimbledon Common at a fun fair. The vector graphic one, you sort of go left to right, you get
Yeah.
the TIE fighters and you shoot TIE fighters. And it's all just vector graphic, but it's a really, really, really compelling and fun game. And I said, Star Wars. I'll do Star Wars. And he's like, Star Wars, Star Wars, what are you talking about that? Yeah, crazy. Yeah, oh, you're killing me. Oh my God. That's old. It's old. Who wants it? And I'm like, I'll take it. He's like, oh, no, kill. I said, how much? He went, oh, 25,000. I said, done. And I'll take Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, because there were three coin-ups of them. He said, oh, God. So we got the rights. And I knew Star Wars was just this thing, Well, I know it sort of seemed a little bit out of date, but actually people loved it. And that game in particular was a great game. So
Mm.
for the one, well, a few times in my life, I actually managed to merge a good game with a good, I thought it was going to work. And I thought, well, gosh, let's do this. So we then announced it to CTW, the front page news, Domark signs Star Wars, because we were very good at getting publicity. And then I got a phone call from Rod Cousins that he was at Activision. And he rang me up, and I sort of knew him vaguely. I met him. And he said, oh, Dominic, yeah, Rod here. We got a game the other day, a demo for Star Wars from this guy called Jürgen in Germany. You want a copy of it? Because we don't want to do it. I'm like, yeah. So we got this demo, and actually it was bloody good. So we
Mm.
got hold of Jürgen Friedrich, and we said, come over to London. We'll put you up. Pay for you and pay money to make conversions of the. So he came over, and I think I'm going to say in about 4 months he'd done everything, all the conversions for us, and sure enough we put it out, and it went to number one at Christmas, and the first check that we sent, royalty check that we sent to Atari was something like $570,000.
Jeez.
And the advance was only 25. So so I got a phone call, hello, is that Dominic? Yes, Dominic. Who that? You? I mean, what? And well, little games company. What are you busy next week? No, no. Okay, we're going to come and see you. So the following week, three big Atari executives turned up: Randy Browline, Becky Depew, and Dan Van Elderen, and they were on my doorstep, and they, we with this little tiny company, and anyway, we went out for lunch and then dinner and whatever. And by the end of their trip and our conversations, we'd got an agreement to do all Atari coin-op games from there on. Every time they
Wow.
made an arcade game, we would make the home computer version of it,
Mm.
and that was the start of a beautiful relationship with Atari and those guys who became very close friends. And it later led to them distributing our Sega products in America, and and we really did hunt as a pack, with all the shows and everything else. So that was how it started, and it was a great line, because you imagine, they only really manufactured and distributed arcade games that worked. Coins
Mm.
dropped. They tested things to an nth degree before they went into mass manufacture. So every game was a winner, really. you know.
Yeah.
And making the home computer version of it was a fairly simple thing. We had a studio converted, ported over. And of course, the marketing was already pretty much built in.
Mm.
There's a rich seam of income that we sort of just, is one of the lines that we had. We had several lines, but that was great.
Another one of your best-selling titles, it was the Championship Manager games. So how did you get involved with the Colliers, and how did all that come about?
Well, so I look. I will confess that I am not a football person. Okay, I think my school was two terms of rugby. So I think
Right,
it was
okay.
the only round ball at my school was a cricket ball, I think. Um, and so I really have no knowledge of it at all. When I was approached by one of our testers who looked at games that were submitted, there's a fantastic football management game. I was like, what? No. I mean, there's loads of popular management games. Kevin Toms, I think, various people had their and it was a crowded market. And anyway, it wasn't. Yeah. But about a week later, my finance director came in and said, Dominic, you should take a look at this. And I looked at it. It was just all, type. It wasn't any graphics. There was no people kicking footballs. And I was like, well, what the hell? I didn't understand it at all. But anyway, they all said you've got to sign it. They promise you've got to sign it. So rather reluctantly, we got the colliers down to London. I have a feeling they were Newcastle, Sheffield University, something like that, these brothers. And they came down. And anyway, we agreed to publish it. And we gave them £5,000 as an advance, which they were literally thrilled with. They couldn't believe their luck. By the way, it was back in 1989 or 88 or 89. So, that was good money if you were a student.
Mhm.
And again, same thing. So we put it out. Actually, I went to the only thing I came up with, my only creative thing I came up with was the idea of a football manager in those days. So it wasn't sort of a movie star looking, hunky as they all are now,
Yeah.
They're all, they're all sort of male models. It seems to be most of these young football club managers. But in those days, the picture was sort of some big ugly mug, in a camel hair coat with a cigar, shouting at the players. So we went. There is actually a sort of agency where you can get ugly people. I mean, I know it sounds bizarre, but anyway, so we went to this ugly agency and we picked the ugliest man we could, and we photographed him exactly in that camel hair, the sort of stadium behind him. He jabbing his finger, going, oh, with a cigar, whatever. Obviously, a really horrible person, and and that was the box, that was the pack, and championship manager. Anyway, thing went out, and we sold a few thousand copies in, and well, the next week we sold another few thousand, and then the week after that we sold about 10,000. And the end of the month, we got an order for 24,000. And we were like, what? What's going on here? And sure enough, their first royalty check, so the same thing, was £75,000, right? Because there was obviously so they come whizzing down to London. We all go out. They got a brand new Golf GTI, which and, and off we go. So it all was really, really fantastic. Obviously, we commissioned them to get going on Champions Manager 2. And unfortunately, we didn't realize that as brilliant as they were very inexperienced, really. And the Champ Manager 2 was an ambitious project. Unfortunately, it was full of bugs. And we put it out, probably because we had to. We were castigated on the very early bulletin boards. This is sort of early 90s. Where bulletin boards have started to be a thing. Thank God. I mean, today, if it was put out on Steam, I mean, we wouldn't sell any. But there's a certain number of people were bitching and moaning about it, and other people sort of, just went and blindly bought it. So although it did quite well commercially, it did anyway. So mercifully, when we put a proper team around at the colleges and for Champ 3, when that came out, that broke all the records. That broke all the
Yeah,
records.
yeah.
And I still dinner parties, I occasionally come across somebody I don't know and they say, oh, what do you do? And I say, well, video games. They go, anyone we've heard of? And I say, well, Tomb Raider, obviously. Then I go, Championship Manager. And as often as not, they kind of reach across the table with their knife and try to stab me to death because, of course, their son failed at bloody O levels or whatever because he played.
Well, you merged into the 16-bit market quite well, didn't you? Because a lot of people had trouble sort of moving, up a notch. Um, was it a much different market, do you think, the 16-bit market?
Well, software sells hardware, and
Yeah.
Hypnosis came out with um, games that really pushed that tech, and beautiful rich graphics and sound and all this, and that drove the market, because in those days it's really odd to think about it, but the things that drove people to buy computer games wasn't just how fun and great they were to play. It was, look what my computer can do,
Yeah, yeah.
you know. And I mean, I remember this is sort of early adventure games coming out with bold boasts like 40,000 rooms to explore, anyone's got enough time to, and crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, good, your computer can generate 40,000 rooms, and it was it was always pushing the tech envelope, but it was always a slightly better graphics and better sound, better this, better speed, blah, blah. So when every iteration came out, every new chipset, every, better, faster, quicker machine came out, the games had to demonstrate what this machine could do. And that was all part of the joy of what was still quite a hobbyist market. It wasn't
Yeah.
really a mass market. Probably one or two children in the playground had a home computer. So really that's what it was all about. So, and of course we knew that, like all these things, it was going to get progressively bigger and better, and in terms of the tech, which in turn would draw a larger and larger audience.
Mm.
And there was always a little bit of a sales gap between the dying embers of a existing platform and the birth of a new one,
Yeah.
because even though the machine would come out, whether it was yeah, right, Amiga or whatever it was, would come out, it wouldn't immediately sell 2 million units. It would take a year and a half to get to 2 million. So you
Mm.
had this kind of rising market, but not really replacing the absolute market that you were previously, which is now dead, largely
Mm.
because retailers would only stock the new stuff, and the old stuff, because of limited shelf space, they would simply delist. So it wasn't even that the demand for these games was no longer there for a Commodore 64 market. It's just that there was nowhere for them to buy them.
Yeah.
Um, just you played the ones that they already had or whatever. But so it was all about the new one. And there's always this gap. And right now, this industry has been going through a very similar gap in the last 2 or 3 years, with, as you know, a lot of layoffs, a lot of closures and studio closures and games being cancelled and so on and so forth, because it's plateaued really, and we're in a sort of gap. We're waiting for the next bit of tech to
Mm.
pick it up. Although
Yeah.
it is, to be fair, something of a mass market today, and solid. So it's a very solid, good market. Those days, it really did take a dip, and then, so it was true also of things like PlayStation, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3. Every time a new one was announced, the retailers would get ready to clear off the first one, put the new one on, and
Mm.
you had to sort of hunker down, get on reasonably early, but not too early. Because
Yeah.
if you got dev kit for play, I remember I was chairman of 3DO Europe, which was it's a software company at that point. It had stopped making hardware. Trip Hawkins, the founder of Electronic Arts, had founded 3DO as a platform to beat Sega and Nintendo, and of course it failed. He then reversed gear and went and became a games company again. And he good friends with Trip, and he said, "Dom, be my chairman." And I put a team together for 3DO publishing. And I remember going to Paris with Sony, their invitation with a bunch of publishers, and Chris Deering apologizing for the fact that they'd encouraged too many of us too soon with dev kits to make games for PlayStation 2, because there was a flood of games coming out and there weren't enough machines to greet it. And
Ah.
yeah, to greet all the games. And we weren't selling anything like the numbers that we'd hoped we would sell. And it
Mm.
took a year or two before there was enough installed base of PlayStation 2s to actually be able to sell, 500,000 copies or something. So you can go too early, and
Mm.
you there's a lot of money that way. So it's really about judgment, in that sense, when it comes to in and out. And we did judge that the Amiga and, of course, the Atari was going to be a big market for us, and we kind of navigated it.
How did you transform into Eidos? Because wasn't Eidos, they were a very small firm and they were making compressions for software, weren't they, originally?
Absolutely. So So there was a fellow called Stephen Streeter who
Hmm.
was a sort of a maths guru person, and I think had got a couple of degrees in mathematics at Cambridge University.
Right.
He'd started with a couple of friends a data compression company. The idea being that in those days the internet was so slow. I mean, modems. I mean, very very slow. ADSL came in, which certainly helped things, but it was by no means fantastic.
Yeah.
His idea was that he would create this codec that would allow. It was just a way of creating little packets of code and sending packets of code in very compressed, in much faster. So that was the idea. It's not. I mean, it's a holy grail. Data compression has always been a holy grail. And he thought that he could do this and do incredibly well. And somebody, I'm not sure who, but somebody floated him, some corporate broker floated him on the stock exchange, raised £1 million for him and his mates to go and build this tech. Now, I think he'd been going a year or two with no discernible progress and certainly no income, no
Hmm.
sales. Therefore, it kind of appeared to people as something that probably wasn't ever going to succeed. And when that happens on the stock exchange, as often as not, these things are considered to be cash shells. In other words, they've got a business, might not actually do well. It may, but it might not. Probably won't. But it's got some money in it. And before they waste all that money,
Hmm.
a pipe dream, stop what you're doing, get a proper company, private company, and put it into this shell and give that company the money that you've got and let them go and build. So it's really it's just what they call sort of a reverse. And so I had some city friends by that stage, and one of them introduced me to a fellow called Charles Cornwall, who was a South African, and he was a financier. And we had a chat, and he was at that point he bought into Eidos, so he was a shareholder in it, and he was looking for something to reverse into it.
I see. Yeah.
He came in, saw me, and obviously all the things we were doing. We were a proper company with proper people and sales and income and all this. So he thought this is perfect, and it's techie, which is kind of same. So that was it. We agreed the terms of the deal. I mean, we obviously much larger than they were, so this is how it works, and the shares get divvied up. But for me, it was a solution to a never-ending problem, which was always cash flow, and we
Yeah.
were running out. We could get there. I mean, we nearly went bust so many times. We always got through. We always made it to the other side somehow, but it was quite enervating to constantly be scratching around for money. And the idea of having access to capital was very attractive. And of course, from a personal point of view, of course, if you go public and your shareholding is suddenly worth something on a board, you want to shave a bit off and buy a motorbike, buy the wife a new coat, and so I was keen to do it, and I think we probably had those conversations around about April, May, and we actually listed in September that in 1995. And we came out, I think the share price was about £3.60 was on, there was a price that money was raised at, and it went to £5.80 on the day. So it was well in the money. And trebles all round. I mean, of course, don't forget, I mentioned earlier on about we raised £160,000 from people like Ian Livingston and my mother, my father, and old friends, and some people who we just bumped into and never saw again.
Hmm.
I would get phone calls from people from Hong Kong, some guy Morgan Grenville or Stanley or going, "Hey, Dominic, hello. We haven't spoken in a long time, but it looks like I've got £500,000 worth of shares in my stock portfolio. But how did that go down?" Like, oh, hi, Richard. Yeah, look, hey, it all went well. He's like, but I've forgotten all about you guys. That 10 grand, I've written it off. And it was 10 years, of course, from start to finish. So But anyway, so that was great because leave them alone. And I'd been living in America for 5 years. Wife and two very small children. They grew up entirely in California. We were just outside Palo Alto in near San Francisco, and you know, um, uh, I think it was a great time for everyone. And I think we started to think maybe we should take the kids back to England after 5 years. I mean, they say they grew up there and they were
Mm.
American, and there's nothing wrong with being American. I love America. I love visiting, go often. Um, I think my wife wanted them to be brought up in an English education with all our English friends and family and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we started to think about that. But of course, not straight away. So that was all very good. One of the things it allowed us to do, of course, was to acquire other companies because having access to capital allows you to.
Mm.
And one of the things we did was we bought what was then called Center Gold. It was a combination of US Gold Publishing and Centersoft, the distribution company of software products and hardware,
Yeah.
based in Birmingham, and it was a very successful company. And Jeff Brown actually ran it. He had floated it himself on the stock exchange some years before, but it had declined in share price. The results hadn't been good. Therefore, it was down in that's the thing about the stock market. You make a misstep and your share price just tanks and you're worth nothing. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
terribly difficult to get it back up. You have to, patience and some really great results before you'd ever see investors buy your stock again. So he unfortunately was in that position. And as a result, we were able to buy him relatively cheaply. So we bought his public company for cash into Eidos. And the publishing side of US Gold came with Core Design, which was a studio. And that had been working on a thing which none of us had heard of or knew about, and I didn't even know about much until E3 in June 1996. And that was this rather attractive looking computer-driven, digitally created girl called Lara Croft. And when I saw the title Tomb Raider, my first thought was, well, this sounds like a bit of a knockoff of Raiders of the Lost Ark,
Mm.
which of course it was. But and I was slightly skeptical. But when I saw the footage on a videotape in those days of the game, I was like, oh God, this is absolutely amazing. This is going to be huge. And I launched it at E3 Los Angeles, June 96, on our stand. And we had a big party that night, about 1,000 people. The Eidos parties were famous in those days. And people coming up to me going, damn, I saw that thing on your stand, Lara Croft. It's going to be huge. Tomb Raider, monster. And everybody was fighting it. Everybody wanted exclusive rights. We actually ended up doing a deal with Sony as it happens. And it was one of the things that drove PlayStation 1 sales that Christmas.
Mm.
And it just went off to the moon. And of course, our share price went zooming up. And, and it was actually later that year that we eventually did return to England.
How did the films work in terms of getting the license from you?
So I wasn't intimately involved in that because it was
Yeah.
just after I'd gone. But I believe that MGM did the first one with Angelina Jolie. And I think that $1 million was handed over. It might have not have been, but I think I heard about $1 million was handed over to us, and I guess some carry.
Mm.
But of course, it was a giant advertisement. I mean, when these things are offered to you, you can't look at just how much money you can make out of the title, although that's obviously a thing. But what it is promoting your games to a huge, huge audience,
Mm.
and that's why BAFTA gave it this sort of the Lara Croft and Tomb Raider, the sort of most icon ever award. I think last year. And funnily enough, I'm chairman of a company now called Blaze Entertainment, which does a range of retro game consoles and cartridges called Evercade. And we're doing a pack at the moment with the original Lara Croft Tomb Raider PlayStation 1 game on a cartridge, as it happens.
Wow.
handheld version and there's a console version. It's just let's go back to Sega days, and it's a retro thing, and it's available on Amazon and all good stores. It's fantastic, and it's nice to see Lara, Lara's promoting this company. She's still putting a nickel in my pocket, which is great.
If you don't mind me asking, why did you eventually leave Eidos?
It's kind of hard to say because a lot of people were like, "This is your baby. You built this thing."
Mm,
I think it's all that stuff about, careful what you wish for and all that. You know, it was a real family-friendly firm when I was building it up. Everybody knew everybody. Nobody ever left. We
yeah,
didn't have an HR problem. I don't think we had anybody in HR. We didn't have any HR problems. We were all mates. We had a huge amount of fun. We were sort of, we didn't worry too much about expenses and things. We went out to fine restaurants and pubs and clubs. It was a ride. It was a little bit rock and roll, to be honest with
yeah,
you. And when we became a public company and suddenly reporting procedures and we'd grown hugely in numbers, and I would go to an office, say in London or whatever, and there'd be people I'd never met,
yeah,
um, and I didn't really care for it. I sort of felt that I was detached from it all, and I had a very good, strong number two called Mike McGarvey, who I had dinner with actually 2 nights ago. American chap I'd hired as a salesman, but he'd grown up the ranks, and I basically let him take over the company as CEO. So he filled my slot, and he was full of beans and all that. And I felt I was only 35 at this point, mind you. I mean, or 36. I wasn't an old man, but I guess leave them laughing.
yeah,
Exit stage right before it all goes wrong. I mean, and it did eventually. It took about 4 or 5 years to go wrong, but it did eventually go wrong. I just, and also there were people involved that would start to make decisions about things or be involved in decision making, which I was not necessarily terribly happy about.
yeah,
And my experience, when you let people who don't know anything about the games industry on your board, and they start telling you what you shouldn't be doing or come up with ideas about this and the other, that's the time to run. Because they will always muck it up.
yeah,
It's consistent. That games, people who lived and breathed and worked in games should be allowed to get on with their lives and not be interfered with by the money men or consultants or private equity people or anything else. I think they should just be left alone to do their thing, and I think that's the right strategy. When they try to get involved, be helpful, they normally destroy the thing that they've got, and they did it with Eidos. So
yeah,
in a sort of different way, wasn't private equity, but it was a city. But that's really my experience, and I actually was quite interested in doing other things because bear in mind I'd only ever done video games, and when I came back to England, I joined Telecom Plus, which was a mobile company. StatPro is a financial performance measurements software company for banks.
mm,
I was chairman of Kuju, which was worked for Hard Games Studio, 350 people, a bit like Sumo, which I did float on the stock exchange actually later on.
oh, right.
And then that was bought by Catalyst, which is why I ended up running Catalyst. But that so I did that. I kept sort of one foot in the games industry, as it were, but I had as I have a vineyard and restaurant and other toys to keep me amused. And so I suppose I went plural. And frankly, I wasn't running anything in particular. So I was spending a lot of time with my now 4 children.
Mm,
On holiday when they were on holiday, and just having a nice time. And I mean, I did go back to work eventually, but I had about 10, 12 years of that. And I think from a family point of view, that was actually very good. The formative years, I wasn't an absentee father, always on a jet somewhere.
yeah,
finds the boy at 18 and you've hardly had a proper conversation with them. That's not what happened with us. And I think as a result, actually, we have four very happy children now, much good work, I'm pleased to say. They're now taking me out for dinner, which is great. But they all love each other, and we see each other all the time because we were that sort of family growing up. So I think there was a benefit to it. I mean, I look back sometimes and think, God, should I really have actually taken a break? I took a sabbatical. We took kids out of school, actually. We left America. And for a year and a half, we sort of wandered around the world. And then we came back to England, put them in school. But so we had a fantastic time, the first two. But I could have done that and then come back and then actually got a proper job or started something up. And I didn't. And as I say, I did have a lovely time. Could I have, yeah, maybe, maybe,
Mm.
maybe, but I don't know. I mean, I did have my second go around, of course, with guitars, building that up. And that did, again, end up at 2,500 people. And actually, I really didn't know some offices I hadn't even visited, let alone people,
Mm.
about 2 years ago. So, I did it again. But and had the same sort of feelings about it in a way. So we'll see. And I know even now I'm plotting another one. So,
Well, I'm glad to see you still knocking about in the games industry anyway. And thanks for all the brilliant games as well. A lot of good memories from my childhood.
yes, well, delighted.
Well, thanks for the chat. It's been fascinating.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show. And say hi to everyone. And
I will.
press the subscribe button. Subscribe.